Hi, and welcome back to Thone's Mount Nibbles number 1. This is in the section that's called True Righteousness in some of the study Bibles, and so this for a goodly while we will be talking about true righteousness, and then I'll let you know when we change to something else. And this is today is the introduction to the Sermon on the Mount, and it's 2 whole verses long. We'll be reading Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. And seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain, and when he was set, his disciples came unto him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, and then tomorrow we'll see what he says. The fundamental thing here is a message to the multitudes. So this isn't a private school lesson. This is a pronouncement. I always picture, obviously such things didn't exist at that time, but I always picture like a Billy Graham crusade or something where, he's up on a podium and then there's, thousands and thousands of people in the audience. Now, why is this in the Bible? It's an introduction to the new theological doctrine, which Jesus is going to be talking about. And the communication is teaching disciples. Yes, that included his personal disciples who went around with him, some of which became apostles, but it also means all those people who were present. He's teaching them doctrine. Application to my life. Sitting was the traditional posture for rabbis when teaching. And I think we've talked about that a little bit before, that they stood up to read the scripture, but then they sat down to expound upon the scripture. There was an interesting symbolic statement in this location. Jesus goes up to the mountaintop to teach the group. He thus follows the action of Moses, who received the Old Testament laws from God on a mountaintop. Here, Jesus plays the part of, in quotes, the new Moses. We know he wasn't that, but it's a good way to think about how he must have appeared to the people who he was speaking to, by the teaching in coming verses and chapters of a not inconsistent but kinder and gentler doctrine by which he expected his followers to follow. You get that? He's teaching in the coming verses and chapters, is basically the next 3 chapters, of a doctrine which is not inconsistent with the Old Testament teaching, but is kinder and gentler doctrine. And this is the way he expected his followers to live. In living this way, they also will be obeying some Old Testament law, but that isn't the key here. He is, in a sense, simplifying the law to be related to what he thought was important. This parallel, by the way, between Moses and Sermon on the Mount is further strengthened by the concept that he went up on the mountain was used only 3 times in the Old Testament. In Exodus 19:3, in Exodus 24:18, and in Exodus 34:4. And all refer to Moses going up Mount Sinai to talk with God. Those are important enough. I'm going to read them and explain them a little bit. And Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shall you say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. That's Exodus 19:3. What's he telling them? This is when God was going to, was sending Moses back to pick up Aaron and go and talk to Pharaoh to let the people go. So that's communication number one with God, the burning bush. Then Exodus 24:18, and Moses went into the midst of the cloud and gat him up unto the mount, and Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, this is after all the people had escaped from Egypt. They had crossed the Red Sea without getting wet, and now they've gone to the other side of the desert there and are back at Mount Sinai, the very place where Moses was originally given his agenda for freeing the people. And this is when he was actually learning the Ten Commandments were being given to him by God. And then thirdly, and he hewed 2 tablets of stone like unto the first. And Moses rose up early in the morning and went up unto Mount Sinai, as the Lord had commanded him, and took in his hand the 2 tablets of stone. That's Exodus 34:4. This is the second time that he gets the 10 Commandments, because the people were misbehaving when he came back down the first time. And so he tosses the tablets that God had given him down, and they shatter. And so now God tells him to make his own tablets and then come on back up. And so he took them to it, and God again wrote the 10 Commandments on those tablets. So those are 3 key, important, and very easy to understand to any Israelite who was there. This connection between Moses receiving the law on Mount Sinai and Jesus preaching the new doctrine of the law on a mountain in Israel. God says, I will teach my people. And my personal response is, Lord, thank you for the great teaching ministry of your Son. What a privilege of being a disciple and thus a servant of your ministry. And so now we are galloping along on the Sermon on the Mount and have covered 2 whole verses. So we'll talk to you next time.